Do you think investors are being too complacent at the moment?
Good morning, Heidi. Well, you just mentioned emerging markets, and I think that's a good example of where investors aren't conscious or mindful of the risks that are currently involved. So if we look at emerging markets, they've held up relatively well, but we're actually worried that they've underreacted, and that's for a couple of different reasons. The first is, of course, they've got less capacity to cope with the health crisis, and we're seeing that with infection rates picking up, particularly in Brazil, Russia and Mexico, and that suggests that the peak will be later and actually larger than developed nations. They also rely more heavily on export-led growth and also are vulnerable to the collapse in oil prices. And lastly, of course, those government debt positions can be quite large across emerging markets, many of which are denominated in US dollars, so they don't have much fiscal capacity to respond with stimulus to this crisis. So that's sort of just one example of where we are very cautious, and we've actually recommended that investors reduce exposure to emerging markets. It's going to be a risky place over the next couple of years.
And of course, not all emerging markets are created equal, I should say. What about China then? Because we know in terms of the language that we've had, the steer from the PBOC and from the government that we will see more stimulus to come. Does that make you more hopeful of a stronger recovery within China?
Unfortunately, we don't see it being, the stimulus that was anticipated by investors. So investors were really banking on seeing, large-scale infrastructure spending, which was the case in 2009. But really, I think it's going to prove disappointing because China's fiscal stimulus to date is less than a tenth of what was spent during the GFC. And then adding to that is, of course, those political tensions, which seem to have flared up again with the US and Australia, and also the slowdown in global growth. So for those reasons, we are still confident in the long-term growth story of China, so we're happy to hold positions, but we're certainly not adding to them at the moment.